So we're back, everybody, with Facts on the Ground and with Mohamed Elmaazi, and we're going to continue just for a few minutes our discussion about what's been happening in the Julian Assange extradition case. So, Mo, you were talking about the mental health arguments that the defense
Yeah.
has made.
So these are arguments made by the defense. So I don't see in the short term how they could harm Julian, mainly because I mean the prosecution argued against it. They even went as far as to suggest that he was faking, or that it wasn't as serious as the defense were making out to be. Um, so and ultimately the grounds which the judge did accept fully were on health grounds. Now, in terms of the judge being controlled by external force, so I'm the kind of person who will look at structural explanations as the default, and individual explanations such as that if there's proof. And for me, proof is like actual tangible proof, right? The fact of the matter is, you have to look to see what kind of people go to law school, what kind of people following law school then go on to practice certain types of law. And then from there, we're talking about class and ideology and what have you. And then from there, what kind of people then even want to be judges. And then also what kind of people get selected to be judges, right? So the it's the Lord Chancellor who appoints a body of people, and that body of people, a commission, pull up a bunch of names every year, or whatever it is, and then the Lord Chancellor picks from those names, right? So it's from the government, right? Basically, I mean, not too dissimilar as in the federal system in the United States, right?
Right.
So you have to think about the process that somebody goes through to begin with to sit where it is that they're sitting. Now, it doesn't mean that there isn't a range of people, and that there's a range of perspectives, but the reality is that like people become judges, or accepted to become judges, or approved to get promoted through the ranks because they're considered to be a safe pair of hands, right? That's an expression here that's used quite often.
Hmm.
When somebody's a safe pair of hands, that means that they're going to handle things in the right and proper way. You don't necessarily need somebody whispering in somebody's ear, threatening or coercing, because the institution itself already works in that favor. Does that mean that I refuse to believe that there's never been a case of any judge or whoever or jury member ever being blackmailed by a member of the state? No, like obviously I'm perfectly, millions of cases over the years. That's certainly possible. But what I mean to say is that's typically not needed, right? The system is already stacked in such a way, right? Just as people see with like police, how police behave towards certain communities, not just in one area, but across the country and over generations, right? And that's because the institution attracts certain types of people, and then you either succumb to a pre-existing culture, or you get sacked, or you quit. And you see that within finance, and you see that within all kinds of
Hmm.
professions, right? So these are all professions perpetuate their existence by having a series of written or unwritten rules that you adhere to. And it could be even a news organization, it could be whatever. And you either do it consciously or unconsciously. Um, and not to mention the fact that there's just, loads of smearing of Assange as well. And all these judges, they also read the newspapers and they read the broadsheets. They're not going to be reading, my articles on the matter, right? They're going to be reading Guardian articles or Times or BBC, or what have you. So that would be where I'd place that position,
I
that
think that
critique.
I think that's a good materialist approach to it.
Yeah, and it's just, you know, uh, one person criticized me recently. It's I've never had like what I would consider more favorable criticism, but they didn't say it favorably. They say you're so obsessed with proof and evidence. It's like, okay, well, I can't help it. Like that's the way I work, right? It's probably one of the things that attracted me to the law in the first place. I always demand it of the state. Where's the proof? Where's the evidence? So I feel like I have to demand it of myself and of others as well. Um, and don't get me wrong, there are things that you might feel might be true,
Hmm.
but I think I'd rather not express publicly what I feel or conspiracy theorize might be true with friends, say, off the record versus like, something that goes out into the world now, especially nowadays when you say things that goes out, millions of people could potentially see it and it lasts forever.
Hmm.
Whereas there was a time, like when I was growing up, none of this social media existed and phones were just phones. And they were very expensive and you only used them for phone calls, which were very expensive, and that was it. Right?
Yeah.
So you weren't, you could say things, stupid things, and make mistakes and make assumptions, and then they would just disappear into the ether. Right?
Yeah,
You weren't.
I'm
Oh,
37. I remember those days.
oh,
I
right.
miss
Well, we're both 37, so
I
there it goes. So
I miss them.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I would hate to be a kid. Like I actually feel bad for the. I know it's heavy criticism of youth and how they behave on social media and how they act and what have you. But it's like, thank God I didn't grow up as they did, where you can be shamed and judge each other to the nth degree. But anyway, I'm digressing. Back to the bail part of the application.
Yeah, yeah. If we can just real quick talk about the decision that came down this morning about with regard to the denial of bail for Julian.
So bail was refused. Let's get that part out of the way. I thought it was going to be granted. I think lots of people thought it was going to be granted. Granted on the basis that he's spent 15 months in pretrial detention, right? This is not including his 50-week sentence for absconding on bail, absconding while on bail. When he sought and applied for and got asylum, which is a right protected under international law, which the courts here seem to have just dismissed. So it's amazing how they seem to just like dismiss international law when they want to, and then praise it and celebrate it when they want to as well, right? But that's the nature of when you're like a 200-year-old empire like Britain, right? So the rules don't only apply to us when we say they apply to us.
Former empire.
Yes, yes, but there's still that echo, one, and two, it is part of the US imperial umbrella now,
Yes.
right? So in order to maintain their position or have a serious enough position in the global hierarchy, to use language among like US planners, the ruling class of this country ultimately made a pragmatic decision that to accede to and become a junior partner of the U.S. imperial umbrella post World War II, when it became clear, because empire is very expensive, as Americans should know, and as you know, it was the same for Britain as well, same for all. People don't realize just how expensive it is. It's incredibly expensive to maintain colonies or military bases or whatever it is, and then police those, and you have to police trade routes, and then you have to have an entire mechanism that's constantly fueled, which is just very, very expensive. And then if you are no longer able to extract the same amount of money or wealth to fuel the expense, then eventually your empire starts to collapse, and you have internal contradictions as well within the system. So but yes, to get back to the decision, it was argued that he should be granted bail because he spent so long in pretrial detention, because the circumstances that led him to abscond last time, 8 years ago, are completely different to now. Before, he was at risk of essentially being rendered from Sweden to the United States at a time when the courts here said that there was no evidence of a secret indictment against him, so he had nothing to fear. It's just a preliminary investigation into sexual assault allegations in Sweden. Whereas his position was, I have no problem with addressing those preliminary investigations. In fact, I was there already in Sweden and extended my stay, and I only left Sweden on the basis that I was told by Swedish prosecutors that I could leave. I hired a lawyer in Sweden who contacted Swedish prosecutors. They told me I could go. I left, and then by the time I arrived in the UK, they issued a European arrest warrant for me. It was almost like that was deliberately planned, right? Because you don't need a European arrest warrant if the person is physically in the country. Bear
Hmm.
in mind, there have never been any charges. So anytime you see any reporting of charges, of sexual assault charges, that is factually incorrect, right? And
Hmm.
that's a very important distinction. It was only ever a preliminary investigation. And so also at the time, he didn't have a fiancée and two young children. He does now. Also, his experience of having been in the Ecuadorian embassy as an asylee for 7 years, and things got much worse after the new Ecuadorian government came and then started to play ball with the Americans and started to terrorize him more and more, and things got worse. Combined with then the isolation in Belmarsh prison, this, this also, the defense argued, means that Assange has no interest in fleeing anywhere and being isolated up in any other kind of hideout or embassy or it's basically he wants a quiet life, right? Can you imagine 10 years of this? Remember, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture combined with two other independent medical experts, all individually examined separately from each other, examined Julian Assange when he was brought from the embassy to Belmarsh prison. Each wrote their own reports and then consulted together. And all three of them found that he showed clear signs of the symptoms of psychological torture, which
Hmm.
Meltzer stresses is not torture light, right? So
Right.
psychological torture was employed in Nazi concentration camps against resistance fighters who they could not extract information from using more traditional means of torture. So that is something that is important for people to understand. He said that people can more often associate themselves with physical torture, physical pain. Like it's all physical, right? You
Hmm.
can't separate this stuff. So it's a false dichotomy. It's a false distinction that was made up for legal reasons to find an exemption to torture you practiced by the CIA, but
Hmm.
more overtly physical, right? Like drilling into somebody's leg or pulling out nails or teeth or what have you, or electrocution. Um, People I think can more identify with that than they can with oh he's just being denied the ability to sleep properly and white noise and all the rest of it, and they don't realize how that can actually drive you insane in a
Hmm.
very short amount of time actually, and also has physical implications, lifelong complications, increased risk of stroke, heart attack, etc., long after it's stopped, right? um, so they put this kind of context along with the fact that because of her decision, there's nowhere else in the world that he is now more safe. Because if he goes anywhere else in the world, the US can just reinitiate extradition proceedings against him again.
Hmm.
He'd be rearrested and reprosecuted and go through another set of extradition proceedings. And now that he has a judgment from her to discharge his case, and the fact that I already said that appeals against refusal to extradite on health grounds are invariably denied, means that he is, for all those reasons, in a much more secure position. Everybody, well, I don't know about everybody, but the feeling was that she was going to grant bail, especially because 2 days ago, when she handed down her decision refusing extradition, she told the defense, "Do you want to apply for bail now? I assume you want to apply, or
Hmm.
do you want to wait a couple of days so you can give a more fully detailed response?" And that's what they chose to do today. And then her response was, "Well, he absconded before. I think he's at high risk still of absconding now because there's still the threat of extradition if he loses on appeal. The prosecution have the right to not lose, their defendant because they're appealing." She goes into detail, which is something the prosecution did as well, about Edward Snowden. The
Hmm.
prosecution arguments against granting bail, which the judge recited, was that Julian Assange assisted Edward Snowden to escape prosecution after he revealed mass surveillance and other unconstitutional behavior by GCHQ and the NSA. And he facilitated
Supposedly tried to get him to Mexico.
well, he facilitated his travel to Hong Kong, right? So what one thing that
Right.
Assange did was buy loads of tickets, I believe, loads of tickets to loads of different places under Snowden's name, right? And so they're quoting all kinds of things that he did to assist him, which is
I
it's
see. I
funny
see.
because it's like, but so what? So I mean,
Right.
but of course, from the perspective of someone from the establishment, like what Snowden did was wrong, right?
Yeah.
Even though what he did was expose mass unconstitutional illegal surveillance, as well as by the British spy agency, because they had to pass a law retroactively legalizing. That's what happened after Snowden in this country, in the UK. The Parliament passed a law retroactively legalizing everything that GCHQ had been doing illegally for, I don't know, years, decades. Right, so
Hmm.
that's the result. It wasn't arrests, it wasn't prosecutions, it wasn't any of that. Um, and so ultimately, the judge was unconvinced. He'd absconded before. He likely will abscond again. Ironically, there's a catch-22 situation, right? So when Assange was first appealing not to be extradited to Sweden on the basis that he had evidence and information, there was even some public printed evidence, a suggestion, but he had, I think, private information as well, or elite information, that there was a secret indictment against him, and that if he goes to Sweden, that is just a prelude to being rendered to the United States, that the preliminary investigations have effectively, if you like, created by the policing authorities, not by the women themselves who went for a completely separate issue to speak to the police for a non-criminal matter, right? And that the police there and a third prosecutor, so two prosecutors declined, found no evidence of a crime, and then a third prosecutor ended up, if you like, creating this preliminary investigation. But that the manner in which it was done suggested that he'd be rendered. And Assange appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, who said, we don't see evidence that there's a secret indictment against you. This is just
Hmm.
basically just about Sweden. Number
Is this
two,
the U.S. Supreme
the
Court?
the British Supreme Court, right?
British
Because
Supreme Court.
he's
Okay.
in this country. This is 10 years ago, right? Or eight years ago. Point two, they interpreted the European arrest warrant rules um, in a way that my understanding is they chose a French interpretation of the rules, which is strange since this is not France, right? And they interpreted the rules to essentially mean that you could be extradited even though there were no charges brought against them. It was just for preliminary investigation. Um, and interestingly, sidebar, Parliament passed an amendment after that decision, which is informally known as the Assange Amendment,
Hmm.
clarifying that that's not the rule, that you can't do that, that you shouldn't be extradited for a preliminary investigation, right? If charges haven't even been brought,
Hmm.
right? But they did not make it retroactive, despite the fact that it was his case that led to that parliamentary intervention in the
Hmm.
first place. Now, they could have made it retroactive because you can have retroactive application of the law. It's not unjust if you're giving somebody protection. It's
Right.
only unjust if you're criminalizing somebody for behavior that at the time wasn't criminal. Um, so that's an interesting point as well. So there's just so many elements to this case that people don't even realize that even Parliament intervened because of that. So he lost his case, right, on that strange interpretation of the rules by the Supreme Court, along with the fact that, like, hey, there's no evidence of a secret indictment. Now, there is an indictment, a massive indictment, 175 years, far more than you'd be imprisoned here in this country. Um, Incredibly severe draconian punishments on an ancient law, 100-year-old law from the United States that was originally designed to prosecute people who opposed World War One. In
Hmm.
fact, in fact, successfully, thousands of Americans were arrested, prosecuted, and convicted under the Espionage Act for speech, just for speech, opposing U.S. involvement in the First World War. And many people may not realize that. And that was their convictions were affirmed all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Unfortunately, that's where the freedom of speech doesn't give you the right to yell fire in a crowded theater comes from. It comes
Hmm.
from a decision where the fire is someone saying no, working class people shouldn't be sent off to kill and die against their will in a foreign war. That was the fire, right?
Right.
Um, Now the catch 22 or the paradox that I alluded to is that the fact that he absconded while on bail, right? And we're told for unjustifiable reasons, right? This is just to evade justice in Sweden. The reasoning behind that has completely been validated. And now the judge uses that as a reason why he should be denied bail. It's like, well,
Hmm.
look, he absconded while on bail to avoid extradition to the United States. Extradition is still a possibility if my decision is successfully reversed on appeal, so he should remain and,
Yeah.
and so it's like, but wait a minute. So it's basically the whole point is he will forever be punished for the fact that what is, by the way, a very low level offense, right? I know some people seem to think that's like the worst thing in the world, but it's not like he just skipped town. he got something which is an internationally recognized right, which is the right to asylum. If he
Hmm.
wasn't granted asylum, then he would have had to have left the embassy. And the only reason he was removed is because a new government illegally revoked his asylum, because you're not allowed to revoke an asylee's protection if the conditions which resulted in you granting them persist, right? It's called Prohibition of NonRefilement.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a people can look it up, non-refoulement, UN or what have you, and you'll find it'll say, you're not permitted to send an asylee back to a place that where the threats that resulted them in being granted refugee status or asylum protection in the first place, if those circumstances still persist, which obviously they did. So she also said she found no evidence of bullying or bribery by the U.S. government against the Ecuadorian government to result in them revoking the asylum. Um, just all kinds of things, which is funny because I've written articles pointing to the exact opposite. An IMF loan, a very large IMF loan that was released following the grant, which, by the way, most Ecuadorians didn't even want. I mean, South Americans hate the IMF for good reason. In
Yeah.
fact, any country that's ever had the IMF do its work, right, basically on behalf of the United States, right,
Yeah.
uh, uh, hate the IMF because it's just there may be many people who work in it who are good people, like the World Bank, but who have like very unfortunate views about how society benefits from like mass privatization of resources and elimination of welfare programs to allow the magic of the marketplace to take hold. I mean, literally, this is what the IMF and the World Bank do. Although they
Right.
didn't always. They used to be Keynesian. When they were first created, they were Keynesian institutions. And then all of those people were sacked from the IMF and the World Bank in the 70s with the rise of neoliberalism. And the
Yeah.
rest is history.
Remember Paul Wolfowitz's short-lived
Oh,
tenure?
yeah, I forgot that. Didn't he have a Libyan girlfriend at one point? Because I'm half Libyan. I remember and there was suggestion of improper,
Something got him sacked, but I
patronage or
forget
something.
exactly what it was. Not the fact that he was an architect of one of the largest war crimes in human
Yeah,
history,
yeah.
but yeah, he had improper personal affairs, if you
Yeah.
want to put it
Was
that
it
way.
was it IMF or the World Bank?
I believe it was the World Bank. I could
I
be
think the
wrong on
World
that.
Bank is typically an American that gets appointed, and then the IMF, I don't know if it's somebody from one of the European countries who are members of IMF, right? But they're both U.S. creations.
Hmm.
I think the Council on Foreign Relations had key roles in their creation. But anyway, so that's my ADHD kicking in. I apologize for various digressions. Um,
No, that's all good. I think that was a really good short summary of what's been going on. And I know we talked about looking to the future, but I'm not going to press you for a prediction. But just as far as what's happened, what do you feel the implications are for the future?
well, just on a very practical level, the U.S. government, although this may change with the Biden administration, um, because it can change, will appeal the decision to refuse on health grounds on the basis that the judge placed had too strict a threshold. That she essentially had a test of that it would be the U.S. couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't commit suicide if he was subjected to conditions in U.S. detention there, and the prosecution is saying that's not the test; it's a lower threshold. Maybe it's you know not guarantee that he should still have a chance of committing suicide. Basically,
Hmm.
I think it's basically the inference of that argument. The defense, I think, are going to be looking into applying for bail. In both cases, these appeals would go to the High Court, right? Um, Now, I don't know because we're talking about months now, and we also have to understand that if the prosecution loses at the High Court, they could potentially appeal to the British Supreme Court as well, right? Going into then years, and with COVID and the backlog of cases and all the rest of it, we could still be looking at like a year, 2 years, depending
Hmm.
on how far and how many appeals. So I would say and this is just throwing it out there. Please don't hold me to it because I am not a soothsayer or a soothsayer or either. But let's say, for the sake of it, 50-50 that he wins a bail appeal, and much higher that he wins in relation to the prosecution appeal. That the prosecution has a mountain to climb, a higher mountain to climb in their appeal to get him extradited, but the defense are in a better place now than they ever have been to get him out of detention. But unfortunately, having a conviction for absconding while on bail, for whatever the reason was, from the perspective of British judges, it's just not good. It follows you around like a scarlet letter, right?
Hmm.
And I think no judge wants to look like a fool, right?
Right, right.
Right?
Yeah, they are careerists after all.
Well, it's better safe than sorry. You fool me once, shame on me.
Yeah,
Basically, that's the mentality, and they're not the ones suffering in Belmarsh, so it's easy to have that attitude.
yeah, absolutely. So, Mo, thanks so much for talking with me today and being generous with your time. I know we've gone a bit over, so I really
That's all right.
appreciate it.
That's my fault anyway, so I can't blame you.
No, I appreciate it. I always dig a good conversation that is substantive in some way. So, everybody, thanks for watching. I've been talking with Mohamed Elmaazi. He is a journalist, an independent journalist who's based in the UK. He's been extensively covering the Assange hearing that's been going on. He has pieces that he's written and published in the Canary UK, the Canary Global, at the Gray Zone, and Sputnik, The Real News, and a bunch of other outlets. So definitely check those out. You can follow him on Twitter at M Elmaazi, and that's capital M, capital E, lowercase L, lowercase m, lowercase a, lowercase z, lowercase I. And I recommend you do that because, well, if you're interested in following this case, Mohammed's an excellent source. So thank you very much for joining me today, Mohammed. Much appreciated.
My pleasure.
Okay, take care.
Take care.